Hello, clever people, and welcome to my review for Rocketman. So Rocketman is a film by the director of Bohemian Rhapsody, but kind of by the director of Bohemian Rhapsody. He's the guy that came in for the last 2 weeks of production after they fired Bryan Singer to kind of finish and wrap up the movie. And it follows him, or if it's by that guy, and it follows the life of Elton John from a very, very young age when he first started getting into music, all the way up until pretty recently after a certain point in his life. And by chronicling the years of his life, it doesn't just show the actual story, it shows a stylized version of the story. It feels more like a musical than anything else because they take his songs and they kind of incorporate it into his story. There's a lot of choreographed dance numbers. It's a very unique feeling musical biopic, and right away, that is the number one thing that I liked about Rocketman. One of my biggest passion outside of film is probably musical theater, or just theater in general, and musical theater is an extension of theater. I just really love watching musicals. It's something that I adore. A lot of people in the film community, I find, don't like musicals. They say that they don't feel like real films, or they're kind of hard to review, but musicals is one of my favorite genres. That's why I loved La La Land so much, and even though The Greatest Showman was, really wasn't a great movie, I was still happy to see a movie like that do so successfully because that meant that musicals were going to become more commonplace in America and in the Hollywood industry. So getting a musical biopic like this felt super creative and super original to me, and I was really happy to see it. I also love the story of Elton John. I love his music, and I think that his story is fascinating, how he betrayed so many people, how he lived such a scarred and troubled life, and yet at the same time was one of the world's greatest musicians and greatest songwriters of all time. So this was one of my most anticipated movies of the summer easily, and it did not disappoint. After the first single came out, which was of Taron Egerton singing Rocketman, I actually became very worried about the movie because I thought that it sounded terrible, and I thought, geez, I really hope that the music in this movie doesn't bog the whole thing down. Thankfully, it didn't. I was pleasantly surprised by the use of the music, the way that they incorporated it into random scenes where, a character who felt like they were being betrayed by Elton John, they would start singing a song by Elton John about betrayal. I thought stuff like that was really cool. And also, the singing never really distracted me. They didn't use auto-tune, thank God, which ruined Aladdin, which came out just a week earlier. I was so happy that they decided to not use auto-tune for the movie. But also the voice, the singing, it sounded similar enough to Elton John to kind of feel like its own thing, but it sounded similar enough to the point that it didn't become distracting or anything. It was a perfect blend of being different from his voice and similar to his voice, and that kind of goes for Taron Egerton's whole performance. He gave a performance that feels very similar to Elton John and similar to the way that he lived and the way that he looked, but at the same time it wasn't a carbon copy. It was kind of Taron Egerton's own take on it, which I adored. I felt like Rocketman was, honestly, it was the best movie for what it could have been. Every emotional beat that could have been there was there. Every single song choice that could have went horribly or greatly went greatly. Every single thing in this film just worked. It was magical to me because this is exactly what I wanted out of Bohemian Rhapsody. I wanted to get a deeper sense of who Freddie Mercury was. I wanted to understand his struggles as an artist. I wanted to understand how him getting AIDS and his life really slowing down and failing affected him personally, and I never really got that. It felt like we were watching the story of Queen from like a God's eye type of view, where with Rocketman, you feel so close to Elton John. You can feel his struggle, and you see him as he is struggling to stay, as he uses substance to keep himself alive, basically, as he is just barely functioning. It was all so magical. And there's even the scene where they use Rocketman is probably, other than a couple scenes in Endgame, is the best scene I have seen all year. It almost made me cry. The scene where they use Rocketman perfectly captures what this movie is about, because you see him having to get his stomach pumped for taking so many drugs, and then literally seconds later he has to go back on stage. And that type of struggle really helped me sympathize with Elton John, and it made this movie such a strong, memorable experience. I gotta say, I don't have a whole lot of problems with Rocketman. I think that it is exactly the movie that I wanted it to be. And right now, my number one of the year is like a three-way tie between this, Booksmart, and Paddleton. All three movies feel so unique. And what is so admirable and so great about Rocketman is that they took his life. They took a simple man's life, and they didn't go on the normal musical biopic approach, but they made it stylized to fit who Elton John is, so that you still feel like you understood his character through the style. The style reflected who he was and how he saw life. That's just another expert and smart thing. I can go on for hours about how genius this movie is, and I know that this whole review has kind of just been a cluster of ideas kind of thrown together, but there's just so many good things in my mind about this movie. It turned out so well. It helped me understand who Elton John was, and in the end I was just amazed by how well it turned out and so happy with it. I will give Rocketman a 9 out of 10. Alright, that concludes my review for Rocketman. So, what are your thoughts on this film, or how did you think that this film compared to Bohemian Rhapsody? Comment in the comment section below and let me know. I'm Robert Burke, and this has been The Clever Critics. Goodbye.